Try. There we go. Okay, well, let's dive right in. We're going to keep pressing forward on our narrative analysis together. And just by way of reminder, when we're talking about narratives, we're talking about stories, of course. And there are four key elements to a story, or at least four general categories, if you will, things to consider, things to look for, things that we need to be aware of to rightly understand the story. And of course, one is the setting, just needing to understand the background of the story, where it happened, when it happened, who's involved, what is the cultural situation of those involved in the story. That's all important and helpful to give us a understanding of the background. And then the scenes. Every story is broken up into scenes. Those are the pieces of the story, the building blocks of the story that help to reveal the plot. They reveal the events and dialogue and things like that to carry the plot of the story along. And then, of course, every story has characters. Those are the characters within the story, and that's what we looked at last week together. We started identifying, looking at the key characters of the story. And if you remember, we identified a few of them, four to be exact. The first one is the protagonist. And if we remember, you can think of who is the protagonist? What is the main feature of the protagonist? He's
the main character, the leading character.
Yeah, he's the main character of the story, or the hero of the story, some might say. He's the one that really is a central part of the story. The story revolves often around him or her. And then we have, of course, the antagonist. So this is the person that opposes the main character. All right, and it could be more than one. Antagonists can be more than one person. They oppose the main character. Sometimes they might be referred to as a villain, but they're not. It's not always negative. So we're going to actually see that today. And the antagonist is really, you can think of it more as the one who creates or worsens the problem in the story. And we're going to discuss this when we get to plot, but really with a story, you have to look at it in terms of stories are really typically center around a problem and the resolution of that problem. So a problem and a climax, problem, and then what's going to happen? Is the problem going to get solved? Is it going to, what's going to take place with this problem? And so the antagonist really is the one who instigates or creates that problem, or perhaps worsens the problem, makes things hard for the main character, the protagonist. And then we have the foil or foils. And these are essentially, you could look at them as they compare or contrast with the other main characters. They either show what the main characters should be doing or should not be doing, typically. And again, in a story, you could have many, many characters, but only some are going to be considered main characters. I think we discussed last week, right? They're like in every movie or anything, there's extras. There's people in the story that just are sort of really part of the background of the story or help make the story realistic, but they aren't a key individual within the story. They're really there sort of like props almost, in a sense that they make the story believable or true to life or something along those lines. But there are characters called foils that are intentionally put there by the author to serve as a contrast or as a comparison to the protagonist or antagonist, or even to other foils at times. So they are an interesting character that are in the story, and not every story has them. So we don't want to force characters into the story that aren't intended to be there with any function, but they are in many stories, especially in scripture, because right, scripture is intended to instruct us, and so foils sometimes can are often used in order to provide that instruction of what a main character should or should not be doing. Then, of course, we have the narrator. The narrator is not a character that is in the story like the other characters, but they are the author of the book, and they tell the story, give details, describe thoughts or actions or motives of the key characters. They're sort of the all-knowing character who directs our thoughts or understanding of the characters, events, etc. in the story. All right, so the narrator may reveal a particular thought or attitude, or they may direct attention to a particular action. For example, I've found this interesting in Mark, Gospel of Mark. The first chapter, hopefully you can see this on your screen.
Yep.
Of course, Mark begins with John the Baptist and his entrance, and then, of course, the baptism of Christ, and then Jesus in Galilee preaching the gospel of God, and then he goes to Capernaum, and he is in Capernaum. Who's from Capernaum? Who lives there? Anyone remember? Peter, yes. Peter and his brother. And Peter, of course, is married, and he is living there. And in Mark 1, let's see, where is it at? Yes. Mark 1, let's see if I could get Daniel, if you would read for us verses 29 to 31.
Okay. And immediately after they came out of the synagogue, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was lying sick with a fever, and immediately they spoke to Jesus about her. And he came to her and raised her up, taking her by the hand, and the fever left her, and she waited on them.
All right, great. So notice here, this is all, narrator comments. He doesn't have any dialogue at this point. He's just narrating. And notice some of the details that he points out here, particularly regarding Simon's mother-in-law, okay,
Yeah.
which tells us he's married. What is some of the details he points out?
Sorry, Pastor Tim, I thought what you meant by what's interesting, the fact that Simon Peter is married. The Roman Catholic has no reason for the celibacy of the Pope and the rest of the
Yes, good observation. Simon's mother-in-law. Well, they also tried to, some believe, Mary remained a virgin, and so they have a hard time with Jesus's siblings.
Yep.
So they say actually that the word for brother there is a cousin. So that's how they get around that one, or try. But yeah, what else do we see here? Some of the details just that the narrator mentions about the mother-in-law and what Jesus did. Anything strike you? think there's some interesting details here. I'm not looking for anything deep, super deep theological here, but just something that I noticed sort of reading. It says he came to her, right? That is Peter's mother-in-law, raised her up, taking her by the hand. And the fever left her, and she waited on them. And I think what struck me was this remark from Mark about, taking her by the hand. What does that communicate by Jesus doing that? It's an interesting detail, I think. And the reason I bring it up is because not long after this, just a few verses later in Mark, he talks about a leper. Mark brings up the story of the leper, right, that comes to Jesus, falls on his knees. If you're willing, you can make me clean. And then notice verse 41.
Yeah.
What's it say there? Moved with compassion, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him. That's an interesting detail to include here. Mark could have just simply indicated, the dialogue here that he says, if you're willing, you can make me clean, the man says. And then he could have just jumped to, Jesus said, I'm willing, be cleansed, right?
Yep.
But notice here, verse 41 tells us first, his motive, or what was going on in his heart, moved with compassion. And then secondly, he describes this particular action that Jesus took. He stretched out his hand and touched him, right? You guys see that?
Yeah.
What does that reveal to us, that particular detail? And as you think about it being there, what if it wasn't there? How does it being there sort of maybe change or focus some of the details of this particular story? Anybody have any thoughts? I'm speaking mainly about verse 41 in particular here.
Well, I don't know, but to touch the mother-in-law, but definitely not a leper. It would have been right. That would have been a shocker. I mean, the mother-in-law is not a leper.
Right.
Jesus is very personable and very compassionate, very close. When I see him, I wonder, will he touch me? Will he just reach out his hands when I see him for the first time? I know I want to see his hands because I know that's going to be important. But he might take me in his arms. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
Just to hear his voice. Oh my.
Yeah.
That's thought-provoking. What a privilege to have the second person of the Godhead. I mean, it's awfully difficult to think of Jesu Christos as just a man. He's so much more. But here he's definitely, well, like it says, compassionate. Wow.
Yeah, I think there's really these little details, really can be give us significant insight into, in this case, right, one, the heart of Christ, that he's moved with compassion here. So he not just healing for the sake of healing, or to show that he can, or to show that he's Messiah, or to show that he's God, but that there's a desire, an empathy in his heart towards those he's healing. And here, to the extent, like you pointed out, Dwayne, that he touched the leper. And actually, if you look up the idea here, notice it says first Jesus stretched out his hand. So, he's extending himself because notice, where is the leper? What's the position of the leper here? Tangin, where is he?
Well, he's on his knees.
Yeah, right? Verse 40. The leper is falling on his knees. So he's down, right, prostrate before him on the ground. So what does that mean Jesus had to do to touch him?
Jesus had to bend down at least.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. He had to bend down. And the word for touch here, actually, I think grab might be a better word. It's an idea of a firm, a firm grip. Not just like, he stuck out his finger, just, kind of, it's more like a firm grab. And so that says a lot, doesn't it? That if you could picture what the narrator's describing here, the motive in his heart, the empathy, and that he's basically bending over, stretching to firmly grab this man that was a leper. Wow, there's volumes really in that act of compassion and kindness, right? Because this leper, of course, right, they were not to be touched, and we don't know how long this guy was in leprosy, right? And of course, the lepers were banned; they had to be outside of the city. So who knows how long this man had been since he'd been touched, right? I mean, we're not told, but certainly not only does Christ heal him, but Christ also shows him a real tender kindness, doesn't he? A real, I think Dwayne said, intimacy, a personal. So that's I think again, just with these few statements from the narrator, it opens up so much more to reveal the heart of Christ in this particular healing. Again, if we take this part out and just have, Jesus said to him, "I'm willing, be cleansed," and the leprosy left him, then all we're left with is, okay, Jesus performed a miracle, showed his power, showed his authority over disease. And that's, of course, will be fine, but the narrator here includes these few remarks, I think, to guide and direct our thoughts a little more as to not only did Jesus have the power to heal this man, but that he wanted to, that he empathized, and that he has a heart of kindness. If you remember in Acts, right, it says Jesus went about doing good, and that he was kind. And so here's just a great example. If you pay attention to narrator details, he gives us insight into things that he describes, not just in the dialogue that he communicates or writes about in the story. Okay, and it's just one little thing. And I was pointing out the mother-in-law because it says there that he took her by the hand. So again, also a very tender act of kindness, to this older woman in helping her out of bed, basically. He could have just healed her and moved on, but in that healing, he's taking her by the hand to just showing, I think, a real kindness and respect for her and helping her in that sense. So these are just some few examples of pay attention to the narrator, because he will include details and information that will help to direct us to what the narrator wants us to understand. Okay. So these are just a couple of examples that I wanted to have you consider and think about. Maybe one more. This is one of my favorites. In John chapter 21. Well, I guess before we do that, are there any questions or comments about about that from Mark? Anybody have any other thoughts?
Yeah, this business of Jesus being meek, mild, and humble. I mean, if anybody had a reason to have an ego and to throw his weight around and to be bossy and I suppose arrogant, the Son of God certainly did. But notice the meekest man that ever lived, it says, huh? And what does that tell us about the nature and the character of God and how close he is and how willing to forgive and draw us? But we're so proud. We're the proud and the arrogant and the I suppose self-centered ones. Well, we got to get over it. I tell you, there's what the Lord sets a tremendous example for us of being so sensitive and eager to help and encourage and lift up and oh my, yeah, what a challenge.
Right, right. We see the humility here of the Lord, right? To touch this man who is really untouchable, right? And who knows what he looked like or smelled like, but definitely, you're right. You can see that here. You, Chai, were going to say something? I thought I heard.
No.
Okay. Yeah, let me just grab one more. There's many examples, but this is John 21. Of course, right, the story after the resurrection when they're fishing and Jesus appears, and right, Peter sees him and jumps off the boat, right, recognizing when Jesus calling to them from the shore, and Peter recognizes who it is, or John does, and then Peter jumps off the boat and swims, and John's rowing over. So the disciples make it to the shore, right? And here's what's interesting, to me anyway. When they get to, let's see, verse 8, let me ask, Tangin, can you read verses 8 and 8 to 10?
But
8 to,
the other
I'm sorry, 8 to 12.
disciples-
Go 8 to 12.
Okay. But the other disciples came in the little boat, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards away, dragging the net full of fish. So when they got out on the land, they saw a coal fire already lay and fish placed on it and bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish which you have now caught." Simon Peter went up and drew the net to land, full of large fish, 153, and although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples ventured to question him, "Who are you?" knowing that it was the Lord.
And can you read verse 13 also?
Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. So notice here, right? Peter jumps out of the boat, swims to shore. The disciples are, rowing, trying to row the boat full of fish to get to shore. Then they get to land, and what is there on the land? Notice verse 9. What does John, the author here, who's narrating, what does he say or what does he describe that's there on the shore?
Barbecue is already ready.
Yeah. Yeah. How did that happen?
Oh, Jesus must have prepared the fire and the fish and the bread.
Yeah. And then when they come, Jesus says, "Bring some of the fish." Who's cooking?
Jesus was cooking.
Yeah.
Think about this, guys.
Yeah.
I mean, as Dwayne just pointed out, the humility and meekness of Christ. So here's the risen Lord of the universe who just caused another incredible miracle, right? He brought the fish into the net for them. They'd been fishing all, the whole day and caught nothing. And then here he is on the shore cooking breakfast. And then verse 12, he invites them to breakfast and serves them breakfast, took bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. Isn't that amazing?
And it's amazing that, and it's amazing that he already had fish even before they brought the fish that they caught.
Yeah.
So that's
and the bread.
Sorry, you want to say?
Yeah.
I'll never forget what MacArthur says, when Jesus fixed breakfast, he just breakfast.
Yeah.
Just
but he did, right, have a fire. So I mean, at least he didn't bring it all out of the air, but he did have a fire to cook the fish on. But yeah, there's but the way it amazes me is that he went to the trouble, right, to be preparing this meal for them and then serving it to them.
Yeah.
You Chai, you're gonna say something?
No, I was thinking about the end of verse 3 because the whole night they caught nothing. So Jesus probably in his tender mercy, hey, the guys are hungry. They've been fishing whole night. They caught nothing. And he actually prepared a nice barbecue for them.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't have to.
No, that's the thing. He didn't have to, right? Who should have really? He could have sat on the shore and said, "Hey, guys, make some breakfast."
Yeah.
Right. And of course, that would be perfectly appropriate. He's right. He's the resurrected Lord. They should have been worship or serving him and preparing a meal for him, but it's the other way around. And I've always been struck by this particular story that it's the natural heart of our Lord to serve.
And this again is fish and bread.
Fish and bread. Yeah,
the young boy.
Now, if I'd have been God, I'd have left them out there with no fish, starving and laboring away. I'd just let them pain in their own foolishness. But notice how merciful the Lord is, and how good, how He pursues us, and He's so thoughtful, so tender-hearted. Yeah, those guys didn't deserve breakfast, but I would like to know how he fixed those barbecue fish. How God does barbecue fish. I know barbecue fish are really good, but you have to have the trimmings, and I'm sure it was all there. Oh my, I'm sure it was good. But of course, these guys, they should have been embarrassed. I don't know if they tasted any of it, but they sure, he met their needs, doesn't he always? Oh my, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, just I think that thinking of God calls us to humility, and that's really, I think, one of the main reasons is because he's humble. That's his character. So yeah, as you said, Dwayne, earlier, meekness is not a weakness, or I can't remember how you put it, but certainly seeing it in our Lord like this, just as a matter of fact way, almost like you might miss this if you just sort of read through the story that, well, wait a minute, Jesus is the one being the chef and the servant here. And yeah, I think is thinking of these guys as tired and hungry, and Christ still serving them. And that's just some of the details, just being attentive to what the narrator communicates. If it, we often will just focus primarily on the dialogue, right, and stories, and what the characters say and do. And certainly that's a key part, but don't overlook, and in fact, I would say prioritize the narrator's input. Because the narrator's telling you things, he wants you, you know, the author's telling you things he wants you to know as you go through the story. So important not to neglect giving attention to him. Any other thoughts or comments before we get back to the notes? These were just a couple examples I wanted to show as far as sort of maybe subtle narrator comments that are important. Sorry?
No, I just have a funny one just for us to have a bit of fun. From the John 21 accounts of Jesus doing a barbecue for the disciples, we can be pretty sure that Jesus is not a Japanese. Because otherwise, he would have prepared sashimi and sushi for them.
Yeah.
You know, fresh fish, just slice it off, you know, you have a sashimi or sushi. I'm just joking.
And no rice either.
No rice, correct.
No,
Well, I'm sure there's going to be some curry fish.
Fish head curry.
No, Middle Eastern, yeah.
All
Fish head
right.
curry.
Okay, let's get let me get back to her. So all that to say, pay attention to the narrator. He has there we go. He is the one who really can direct our thoughts and insights in the story. And then finally, the main character of every story, as we ended with last time, of course, is God. I've heard it said that the Bible is not history, but his story. I don't know if you've heard that, seen that before, but that's really important to remember. What does this story reveal about God, as far as who he is and what he has done? So each of these 5 characters, I would say, are the key to the story. All right. So as we go to this particular step, the procedure for doing this character analysis, I think that would be the procedure for character analysis or better understanding the characters of the story, is as follows. The first step is I like to go ahead and read through the story again, make additional observations, sort of a second pass at the reading after having done the setting analysis and the scene analysis, is to come back and read through it again another few times, using this time different translations to identify and note any differences in that, and also just any other insights that may come out as a result of this step. And also too, paying more attention to the characters in the story, what they say and do. So that's really the first step. And then the second step is to identify each of the key characters that we mentioned. Who's the protagonist? Who's the antagonist? Who's the foil or foils? To try to identify those key characters within the story. And once we've done that, is essentially to do what I just indicate as describe each character. And that is simply this, just what are some of the key statements or actions of each of those main characters, and what features of each character seems to be important in the story. And then finally, the narrator comments, what statements made by the narrator are important. All right, now when we did a scene analysis, we also examined the narrator comments and noted them in each scene. But in this particular case, when we're doing the character analysis, it's now more of an idea of looking at the story as a whole, not just in particular scenes, but as I look at the whole story, what seems to be important comments by the narrator in the story as a whole. All right, so again, because of the importance of the narrator in these biblical narratives, I really think it's important to keep examining him first, scene by scene, just looking for specific details of narrator comments, and then in this step to actually step back and sort of look at, in a broader sense, what seem to be important comments by the narrator in the story as a whole. Okay? And then finally, the fourth step is just identify God's role in the story. What does it teach us about him? Okay, so those are the four steps, if you will. Read and observe the story again, and then identify, categorize each character, key character within the story, and then describe each of those characters, and finally identify God's role. So I'd like us to go back to revisit Genesis 22 and do this character analysis for that story. We've already examined the setting of that story. We've looked at the scenes. We took the last couple of sessions together to do that. Now I want to have us revisit the story, but this time we're going to look at the story as a whole, identify the main characters, and then look at their key actions and statements that they make within the story. Okay, so let's read Genesis 22. This time I want to use the ESV as our translation that we're going to use. And I'm going to ask if Fu Wei, if you could read verses 1 through 5, and then Zhao Li, if you could read verses 6 to 10 for us, and Shu Long, if you could read 11 to 15, and then Tongin, if you could read 16 to 19. All right. All right, Fu Wei, you can go ahead. And here, sorry, Fu Wei, let me interrupt. So as this is being read, just sort of try to pay attention to the identifying the characters, key statements that they make within the story, and things they do. All right, Fu Wei, go ahead.
Okay. Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took two of his young men with him, and his son Isaac, and he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God has told him. On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you.
Zhao Li, are you there? All right, I'll just ask.
Yes,
Oh, sorry. Can you read verses 6 to 10?
6 to 10, sure.
Thank you.
And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamp for a burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son.
Great, thank you. All right, Shulon.
11. But the angel of the Lord called him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burning offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven.
And said, By myself I am sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son. I will surely bless, I will surely multiply your offerings, the stars. The stars of heaven, and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offering shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in your offering shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and
Guess we
Abraham
lost the.
lived at Beersheba.
Again, your microphone went out on you there.
Sorry. I'll read from the beginning.
The last couple of verses we missed.
Okay, we'll read from verse 18. And in your offerings shall all the nations of the earth be
Yeah,
blessed,
still
because you have
can't hear you.
obeyed my voice. So
least I
Abraham
can't.
returned to his young men, and they arose
But
and
yeah, I
went
think verse
together.
18 and 19 just missed. In your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went to Beersheba, and Abraham lived at Beersheba. So basically what I typically do then is at this step, I'll read through it a few more times and then see if there's any new observations or things that get my attention. And I wrote down a few things that that struck me, and these are just some of the ideas I had or thoughts I had as I read through it. And I'll have these on the notes that I send you, but we don't need to do this particular step right now. What I do want to do is kind of take us to the next step, which is let's identify each the main characters in this particular story. And here, who might we see as the protagonist or the main character, if you will? Again, recognizing, okay, God's the main character in every story, but just as far as looking at it, the story itself from a human perspective, who we say is the main character of this story? Who's the focus?
Well, definitely one of the main character is Abraham. The fact that his name has been mentioned many times, or most mentioned in this narrative.
Yes. Yeah, I would say he's definitely the main character, the protagonist in this particular account. Now, here's the interesting question. How about the antagonist?
I was thinking, could it be Isaac? Because he asked the father, the fire is here, the wood is here, where is the ram?
Okay, so now is he again thinking about normally an antagonist is one who opposes the protagonist or who creates a problem or makes it worse. And as we think about this story, who is it that creates a problem for Abraham?
Or in
The
this
angel
case,
of the
God.
Lord.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. God actually is the one that tested him and said, all right, go sacrifice your son. And so I think, again, from a human perspective, the problem in this story, right, is Abraham is told to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. So who created that problem? Well, God did. And so God's not a villain, of course. So don't think of an antagonist as always someone bad. They can be just someone who again creates the problem for the protagonist, for the main character, or makes it worse. And I think in this particular case, we could see God in the role of an antagonist, that he creates a seemingly problem here. Now, of course, it's not in the big picture, but, as we're reading the story, we wouldn't necessarily know that yet. We just see, Abraham's got a problem in front of him that he needs to sacrifice his son. And who is it that created that problem? Well, God actually did, because God told him to do it.
Yep.
So that's why we don't always think of protagonist and antagonist as hero and villain. That's often the case, but I think in this story it is not. We have Abraham as the main character, and God presents to him a particular problem. Often the best way to find the antagonist is simply just ask, okay, what is the problem in this story? What appears to be the problem or issue? And then, okay, who brought that problem about, or who is making it a worse or more difficult problem? Okay, so I would see the Lord as the antagonist in this particular scene. Now, what about foil in this story? What about foils? Are there any characters that, again, serve as a contrast or a comparison to the main characters here?
In that case, there may be Isaac,
And in what way?
because he asked us to serve to contrast the problem of where is the sacrificial lamb.
So yeah, he might make the problem more apparent or clear or obvious to the reader. So yeah, I mean, perhaps we could say Isaac. I think in this story, it's difficult to be, what's the word? Too strong about it, but perhaps that, or we could say, the ram is a substitute for Isaac. Could he, you mentioned Uchai before, could he be a character? But here I think maybe we don't really have a foil. Now, if we had another character that was maybe in the story, maybe who told Abraham, what are you doing? You shouldn't be sacrificing your son, or that would be a foil if we had something like that, but we don't. So of course Isaac is a important character in this story. So perhaps he might be a foil, but I would tend to say we don't really have any characters that are an obvious comparison or contrast to Abraham or to God in this particular story.
But what about those two men?
Yeah, again, that we have the two young men, but in what way do they do anything in the story to serve as a comparison or a contrast to Abraham or to God? Or do they just appear to be in the story as, servants that are helping and perhaps there because, Abraham does tell them we were going to go worship and come back. But I'm sorry, I cut someone off. Was somebody gonna say something?
I was just going to say, Pastor Tim, that probably the only role, but they did not say anything in these two young men. The only role is they were the parties that Abraham said to them, we will go and worship, meaning him and Isaac, and we will come back to you. But they didn't actually utter anything in the narratives. So I'm not sure if they are of the foils at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't really say anything. They don't seem to play a prominent role. So I again lean towards I don't think they're put in by the author in the story intentionally to serve as a comparison or contrast. They are characters that are I think could be there just for the author is bringing the reality of the story there, and also two, because they are the ones that Abraham says we will worship and return. So perhaps the author felt that was an important comment to include in the story to support the point of the story. So again, I don't think you could also, I guess, have a category here if you wanted, other characters that we see in the story that are less prominent. Maybe that would be the right way to understand Isaac and the two men.
Or could they just be there? I mean, the narrator wanted them, I mean, they were there, and the narrator wanted to mention it, just in case someone were to question, what did Abraham do there? I mean, so they could just say, well, he went there to worship. And so what happened? Did they come back? So yeah, they came back and we all went back to Sheba.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Could be. I mean, probably it's a safe, it could be a standby kind of role.
Yeah. Yeah, again, there are, many stories where there are a number of characters that are not central to, like if you took the two men out of the story, not much would be changed. Of course, that one comment by Abraham to them is an important comment. But really, if you think about, key characters are ones that if you took the key character out of the story, it would change, could change the story significantly. So that's kind of how I think of them here. I don't want to overanalyze things, but at the same time, it's important to make sure we don't miss those times when the author does put characters in the story or include them, because they are intended to highlight a contrast or a comparison. I think I mentioned before, an example of the disciples in John 4 with the Samaritan woman, where I think they really serve as foils in that story, because they're in comparison to Christ. Christ is, bringing the gospel to the Samaritan woman, but the disciples are just about, go get food. They don't even say a word in that Samaritan village, like, hey, we brought the Messiah with us. You want to meet him? They don't do that at all, whereas the Samaritan woman does. So we have almost two foils there, where the Samaritan woman is actually carrying out the mission that Christ intended, but the disciples were not. The ones that should have been on representing Christ were not, and the Samaritan woman who, so I think in that story, those characters are serving as a comparison and a contrast. Okay, any questions or comments about this before we look at the next step?
Because I see this two men as indicates that this mission is not belong to him, to them.
Yeah, this mission is not for them. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So it makes Isaac the story Abraham and Isaac are so significant to this mission, so special.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good insight. It's a good thought. So again, if you're not sure, maybe you could, make up this or add this fourth group, of other characters that seem to have some importance, but may not be specifically serving directly anyway as a obvious contrast or comparison, but clearly, they have some importance within the story.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
Whether in the longer narratives, a character who may be the antagonist, and as the story developed, he or she became the protagonist. Well, in other words, is there a longer narratives where the role of the character actually changed as the narratives develop?
Well, that's a good point. That can occur just in general, in stories in general. I've seen like movies or read stories where the main character in the beginning seems like the good guy, and all of a sudden at the end there's a twist and you realize he's not the good guy. But I'm trying to think, in biblical narratives, will we have any examples of that? Where
So I was thinking, say we think about the longer narratives in Samuel, about Saul and David, how in the earlier chapters it appeared that Saul was going to be the main character, the promised king. I mean, the king that seems promising, not promised king, seems promising. But as the story developed, sorry?
I don't know if it's you or me, maybe my speaker. Hold on a second.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure the rest can hear. But I'm thinking about the longer narratives of Saul.
Okay.
He started as a promising king, but as the narratives developed, he was in fact the antagonist.
Yeah, well, that would be where in the longer story you have to, I guess you've got two things going on. You know, in the longer narratives, which are made up of a number of smaller narratives, right? Like the Gospels or Samuel. You have to think about first the story as a whole, the big. And certainly in Samuel, you have different antagonists, actually. Yeah, Saul could appear at one point as a protagonist, and maybe in like the account where he's looking for was it the donkeys or the sheep? I forget now. Chapter 10, I think it is, where he's sort of the main character of that smaller story. And he's out looking and he can't find him, so he goes to Samuel, the seer, and etc. So perhaps in the smaller stories, as you go through the account, you know, the protagonist or the main character could be different in those shorter stories. But you have to look at it first in the narrative as a whole. Obviously, Samuel, the focus is David.
Yep.
Right. He's the protagonist for the whole book. Now there are different antagonists at times in the book, depending on the situation, right? You had Goliath in chapter 17, who was clearly a problem. You have Saul, who's a major antagonist for much of the book. And then you almost have David himself as the antagonist toward the end of Samuel, right? Where he creates his own problems, and as he pursued the sin with Bathsheba and all the consequences from it. But I would say, look at the whole story, the large narrative, and there will be a main character in that whole narrative. However, at times in these smaller stories that make up the whole narrative, you may have a change in that particular protagonist and antagonist depending on the story. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
But yeah, I think primarily look at first the story as a whole. And obviously in the Gospels, for example, Jesus is going to be the protagonist in the whole account there. But you may have a few stories, like one about John the Baptist or something like that, sort of where the smaller story is may have a different protagonist and antagonist in it. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Good question. Any other comments or questions before we tackle this next step together? All right. Well, let's do this one. Describe each character. Again, that is essentially what we're looking at is what are some of the key statements or actions of the character, and then we're looking at the story as a whole. Okay. So before we broke it up into the scenes, the smaller pieces, now we're sort of want to step back and say, okay, I'm familiar with the story. I've gone through the scenes. Now I want to step back and sort of look at it in a broader sense. And the story as a whole, what are some of the what appear to be important statements or actions by that particular character. So let's consider first the protagonist, which we said was Abraham. What actions or statements in the story are seem to be significant? And we can even break it up into the two categories here, make it a little easier. All right, anybody have anything they want to contribute for either the actions or the statements of Abraham in the story?
One of the major or important statements that Abraham said was God will provide.
Yeah, let me give the verse numbers there so I can.
Just a moment. I'm just looking at. It should be. Oh, verse 8.
God will provide. There you go. Yep, the lamb.
Yep.
And then, of course, the narrator comes back later to indicate,
Yep.
It shall be provided.
Yep.
And
in verse 14.
Abraham calls.
Twice.
So here, yeah, Abraham says this one. So twice,
Yeah. Yeah.
we see Abraham making that statement. Okay, good.
Mm.
Okay. So what was verses 8 and 14?
Verse 8 and 14, correct.
All right, good. Anything else that Abraham says or does that seems significant in the story?
Is that here I am?
Yeah. Here I am. The verse number? I don't have it in front of me here.
That's one.
Verse 1. And of course, he says it again later when God to his son in verse 7. And then when he's called out by angel of the Lord in verse 11, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. Actually, let's do it this way. Anything else? Abraham doesn't say much in the story, but he does do a few things, right? What are some actions that he does that are significant in this story? I think someone had mentioned earlier too, by the way, right? We will worship and return.
Yep.
Seems significant, right? He says we will worship and we will return. So
yep. Verse
I'm going to
5.
indicate in the next verse 5 expectation. And then the God will provide mentions that. How about his actions? Anything that sticks out to you guys?
How about burnt offering?
Okay, what verse?
Verse 2, verse 6.
Yeah, the
And
instruction.
so verse 9.
Okay, where God tells him, verse 2:6. So the reference to the burnt offering, and okay, that word is repeated. Put burnt. That's a key point within the story. As we focus attention specifically on Abraham, what else would stick out as a to me something in verse 2, right? He rose early and went, right?
Yep. Yep.
Significant action. And the other one that stuck out to me was he in verse 10, right? He stretched out his hand, ready to ready to kill his son.
Yeah.
Just demonstrating his faith and willingness to do it without complaint or rejection, opposition. Anything else?
What about lift up his eyes?
Yeah, what verse was that in?
Verse 4. Verse 4.
Okay, and what would be significant about that, you think?
I think this is some sign of obedience.
Yes. Okay, good. Good. All right, so those would be some things that maybe stick out. I think, how about for the antagonist? In this case, again, we're saying God is the one who introduced the problem for Abraham. What are some key actions and statements by God here? And we can include with this, since we know the angel of the Lord is the Son of God incarnate. We can, he's part of this. Any statements or actions that stick out to you guys?
The first key statement that God said was in verse 2, the instruction or the test given to Abraham. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there.
Yes, that's clearly that's the problem, right? So that's the main statement there. It creates the problem for Abraham. All right, yes, I would say definitely that is a key statement. And then, of course, as Fu Wei mentioned, that's where God mentions the burnt offering.
Yeah.
So it's not just sacrifice him, by not eating a meal together, but actually literally sacrifice him as a burnt offering. All right. And then we don't get much else regarding God's statements or actions until we get to verse 11, right? Then the Lord calls from heaven. And what do we see there in his actions or statements from verse 11 on? Anything strike you? Certainly, perhaps or verse 12 there, right? I know that you
Yeah.
fear God, since you've not withheld.
But sorry, with the end of verse 11, when God called out to him, Abraham, Abraham, and he responded, here I am. Is it an indication of an immediate response, just like his obedience was? You know, he took his son, he went up to Mount Moriah and did what was what God required of him or asked him to do. And when God called out to him, it was, you know, he didn't sort of hesitate. Straight away he says, yes, here I am. Well, you know, what now, you know, in that sense. So it's do you think does that indicate immediate? Always Abraham has always sort of responded immediately without hesitation in this narrative.
Yeah, and I think putting that in as we did with the important comments from Abraham certainly I think indicates that in verse 11. Can even
Mm.
I mean, really, verses 16 to 18, really that whole statement there, the reaffirmation of the Abrahamic covenant, right? That is a significant statement
Yeah.
by the Lord, isn't it?
Mm.
Mm.
I would include that. I just put here
Yeah.
okay. How about actions? What are some key actions from God in this story? There's one big key action here, right?
God provided the ram. So, in a way, the antagonist created the problem and also provided the solution.
Yeah. Yes. Good observation. Let's see, that's verse 13, is it? All right, I don't think it says God directly they are provided, but the ram appears, and certainly Abraham affirms that where it came from.
Yep. That's right.
Verse 14. Wow. And then I don't know. Any other actions or statements you guys see from God? Angel of the Lord here that stick out? I don't really get anything else. Anybody? Okay. If not, again, we don't really have any obvious foils here. How about the narrator? And the narrator doesn't, of course, have any key actions, all right, but the narrator can make key statements. what are some here? Again, looking at it as looking at it as the whole, the story as a whole.
Well, Moses started in verse 1 and say that God tested Abraham.
Yes. So we're given a overview by the narrator. He wants us to know right from the beginning. He wants us to know what is, what's the point here? What is going on? Good. What else? I think he, verses 3 and 6, he sort of describes Abraham's steps that he took and just in his acts of obedience. He got the wood, he went to the place, and he brought with him the fire and the knife. So we might see some significance in that description. Anything else sticks out? Again, looking at the story as a whole. How about verse 10?
Yeah.
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 All right. Tangin, how about you? Do you see anything from the narrator here that seems significant or key to the story?
But I think Abraham, God tested Abraham, and Abraham immediate response. Here I am, and in the morning, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, he got up in the morning. All right, good. Anybody else? Shulong, Fu Wei, or Kaptup? Do you have any other things you see from the narrator that seem significant that we haven't noted yet?
What about, sorry, but that's what is it that's where is that? I don't have the
Are you talking about the one that's the angel of the Lord called out?
Yeah,
Verse
but just right on the action of slaying the sun.
Yeah. Then you're looking at verse 11, I think.
But the angel of the Lord.
Yeah, but the angel yeah, this is
Verse
the way
11.
how he used what's it, this connected word to release the what's it, the suspense.
Oh, in verse 11. Yeah. Yeah, good. Like we're right at the climax, right? Verse 10. That's the climax here. Like, what's going to happen? Is he going to do it? And then right as he's getting ready to strike. Yeah, verse 11. Right? Wait. Abraham. So calls out to Abraham just before he's going to strike. Okay, good.
Mm.
And then two, right? We noticed before, made the observation before, right? The narrator says how Abraham called it the Lord will provide.
Yep.
Okay, so verse 14 sort of and ties in, I think, to all right. Anyone catch anything else? I guess maybe as Fu Wei had noticed before, the repeating of burnt offering. You know, the narrator mentions that specifically, that the ram was the burnt offering. Food. Anything else? This is probably a good. Again, the idea here, brothers, is to, you know, just note what we feel is significant in considering the story as a whole. And this may seem a little, you know, tedious at times. You're kind of looking through for details, but just to continue to reaffirm, you know, each of these steps is designed to focus our attention on different elements or aspects of the story, so that we would be considering looking at the story from different angles and perspectives, and through that, at times would gain insight maybe into things we would not have noticed if we just simply read the story, or if we only considered the setting, or only looked at the scenes. Again, character analysis is meant to sort of cause us to step back and consider the story as a whole. Scene analysis causes us to look sort of at the story in a more narrow, piece by piece fashion. Okay. And then the next step we do, the plot analysis, so we're now trace this, the focus of the story, identifying the key elements of the story that reveal its point. So that's yet another way we're going to examine and look at this, at the story. So all of these steps together, you know, each one by itself can give some help, but then all of them together will really help us to, I think, thoroughly understand the story, and, you know, be better able to identify what the author wants to tell us. All right. But each individual step may at times seem like we're just gathering information, or it may not seem significant, but you're building upon your understanding of the story by looking at it from these different angles. Okay, so that's what we're up to here. That's what the purpose of this is. Okay.
Yeah.
And then last but not least, I mean, we've already discussed, because since God was the antagonist here, we already sort of looked at what he does, says, and does in this particular story. But then we can still take a step back and kind of say, what does the story reveal about God? And that's always an important and helpful. What would anything come to mind beyond what we've already discussed? Anybody have any final thoughts or input about that? What does the story reveal about God? What do we see about God from this particular story? Anybody?
I was just thinking that a casual Bible reader may ask the question, which is a valid question: if God is all-knowing, why did he have to test Abraham?
Yeah.
And by asking that question, I think the narratives of Genesis 22 reveal, I'm just attempting here, that God's real intention was to affirm and to in fact elaborate the covenant and the promise that he gave to Abraham back in Genesis 12.
Yeah, we really see that at the end here, don't we? Of
Yes, verse 14, 15, you know,
or yeah,
15, 16. Yeah.
that the story ends with that reaffirmation, repetition, or restatement of the covenant.
Yeah. And that verse 15, 16, or 17 rather, the God has actually elaborated or expanded or gave more details to the Abrahamic covenant back in Genesis 12.
Yeah, good point. As you compare it
Yeah.
there. Yep.
You know, God talks about his Abraham's descendants will take possessions of the cities of the enemies, and you know, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Good. Dwayne, were you clearing your throat, or were you going to say something? Or both?
Oh, I get talking, I won't quit. Yeah, but verse 17, the confirming of the covenant. The whole thing really is about Abraham's faith in God. It's not blind faith, but it's in these promises. And what hits me on all this is that your enemies, you know, you possess them in the gates. Let's say something like that. Anyway, as I look at Israel today with all of their enemies, the Hezbollah in the north, the Hamas in the south, the Palestinians all around them, and then Russia helping Syria, Syria being not friendly, obviously, and making peace with the Abraham Accords, making peace with some of these Arabian nations. That's amazing. How he's preserved them of Abraham. And this is it seems like it's about faith. The just shall live by faith. That's what Abraham was doing. He was living by faith. And I mean, in these days when all economic and social and governmental and everything is, and even this now we talking about the Omicron, something happening with that, and now we're supposed to take a booster shot and all this. Living by faith, you know, it is really challenging. We don't love ourselves. We don't trust ourselves. We don't brag and boast of ourselves. We have faith in God that's doing something all the time. We can trust Him. We don't have to go to pieces and get all stressed out. We can sleep at night because we have faith. We walk by faith. And just like, you know, no wonder the Bible says that Abraham is our father. We are his children in the faith. He set the example, and here we got it right here. He really was tested to the, I mean, this son whom he loved, and God told him to go kill him. And yeah, he just, it ain't blind faith, but it was a faith that God can't do wrong, and it'll be okay. I mean, tell you, it's just pretty deep here. Yeah, and pretty profound.
Yeah, and you know, he's relying on faith in what here, right? It's obviously in the Lord, but specifically in the promises that he made in the covenant.
Yeah.
Right. So oh, sorry. Go ahead, Daniel.
No, sorry, interrupted you. Carry on.
That's fine.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I think it's faith evidenced by obedience. You find that at the end, verse 17 and 18, the blessing was abundant to Abraham, and in regard to the number of descendants that come from him, and of course, eventual victory over his enemies and possession of their cities. And not only that, but blessings to blessing to all the nations of the earth, not just to Abraham and his family, but to all nations. And this is all because he obeyed. Basically, the blessing is the result of obedience, faith and obedience. If Abraham had not obeyed, this would not have come to fruition at all.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a broader picture here, and really this story presents a broader problem that we'll get into more next week as we consider the plot of this story. But if you think about it and consider it, you know that of course there's the apparent problem with Abraham being told to sacrifice his son Isaac, but there's actually a bigger problem created by that statement. So this story really does weave in and out of the covenant and how Abraham responded to that promise by doing this. And even later, of course, we learn from the writer of Hebrews about Abraham's faith in the promise as well. But we don't have Hebrews to help us out as we look at the story itself yet, right? We're just looking at it from what we learned from the account in Genesis 22. But yeah, any other comments or insights, questions, thoughts about what the story reveals regarding God specifically? I think obviously the focus on God, the provision of the Lord in the sacrifice, and even as somebody said a little bit ago, that God did create the problem, but also brought the resolution to the problem as well. That's good. Good point. Any final thoughts before we conclude? That basically those steps make up what we call the character analysis. And again, it's just examining the story more broadly, noting particular important statements or actions by each of the key characters. And then this step helps prepare us for the next step, which again looks at the story as a whole, considering the plot. And that's where we'll pick up next week, talking about plot, what it is, and how we identify it within a biblical narrative. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, we had another session of videophonics with Brother Philip's church and a whole lot of people around his church there. And little Sing Lei here, she's just one of our little people. It's running it, and I'm just thrilled to death. As I'm so glad that we have this to connect us to Burma or Myanmar.
So what are you guys doing with them, Dwayne? I don't think I'm aware of.
Yeah, well, and again, maybe not. They are, of course, the schools are not working very well up there. And so they want English. And it's just something we can do because we've got the tools here of being able to help them. with it. Oh, Joshua just came in.
Yeah, Joshua is in. Good to see him.
Hey.
Oh, he
He's-
looks awfully tired.